The photograph had already received more than 50 reactions. Before I put my phone down and walked away from the couch, most people had written the same thing in different words. Some said Owen looked exactly like his father. Others joked that Gavin had somehow managed to create a smaller version of himself. One relative even posted an old childhood photograph of Gavin beside the new picture of our son, and the resemblance was difficult to ignore. I laughed at the comments like everyone else, but the truth was more complicated. Over the previous 6 weeks, a simple observation had slowly grown into a question I could not ignore. Every visit ended with somebody mentioning Owen's resemblance to Gavin. Every family call included the same discussion. Even people who met us for the first time seemed fascinated by it. What began as harmless conversation gradually turned into something else. The more often people mentioned the resemblance, the more closely I started comparing Owen's features to my own. The comparison never seemed fair to me. Owen had Gavin's dark hair, Gavin's face shape, and even the same serious expression when he slept. The more I looked, the more similarities I found. What unsettled me was not the resemblance itself. Children often inherit stronger traits from one parent. What unsettled me was my inability to find anything that seemed connected to me. Looking back now, I understand that exhaustion was probably influencing my thinking. New motherhood had changed every part of my routine. Sleep arrived in short pieces instead of full nights. Meals happened whenever I could find time. Some days felt surprisingly emotional for reasons I could not explain. Doctors often talk about the physical recovery after childbirth, but the mental adjustment can be just as significant. At the time, however, I did not see things that clearly. I only saw a question that refused to leave my mind. One evening, while Owen slept in his crib, I found myself scrolling through hundreds of photographs stored on my phone. Most had been taken during the first days after his birth. Some showed nurses carrying him through the maternity ward. Others captured relatives meeting him for the first time. I eventually stopped on a photograph from the hospital that showed Gavin sitting beside my bed with Owen in his arms. It should have made me happy, yet instead of enjoying the memory, I found myself zooming in and studying their faces. The habit embarrassed me, yet I continued doing it. By the time Gavin entered the living room carrying 2 cups of tea, I had spent nearly 20 minutes examining the same photograph. He noticed immediately, and the concerns on his face appeared before he said anything. Over the past few weeks, he had become unusually attentive. Parenthood seemed to suit him in ways I had not expected. He woke up during the night without complaint, changed diapers before I asked, and somehow managed to remain patient even after difficult days at work. When he sat beside me, I locked my phone and forced a smile. The gesture fooled neither of us. Gavin asked whether something was bothering me, and I responded with the answer I had been giving everyone lately. I told him I was tired. The statement was true, but it was far from the entire truth. He accepted the explanation without pushing further, but I could tell he remained unconvinced. That night, after he had gone to sleep, I returned to the living room and opened the photograph again. I wish I could say that I immediately recognized how irrational my behavior had become. I did not. Instead, I convinced myself that I was searching for clarity. The following weekend, my mother visited. She arrived, carrying shopping bags filled with groceries, and immediately began reorganizing our kitchen, as though she still lived there. Watching her move confidently through the apartment reminded me of childhood. She had always been practical. Problems rarely survived for long once she decided to solve them. While she prepared lunch, I sat nearby holding Owen. For several minutes, she entertained him with exaggerated expressions that made him smile. Then she looked at me and laughed. Not because of anything I had done, Because of Owen, the familiar comment arrived once again. According to my mother, the boy looked so much like Gavin that nobody would ever need a DNA test to prove it. The words were intended as a joke. For some reason, they stayed with me. A few minutes later, I found myself asking a question I had never considered before. I wanted to know whether I had resembled either of my parents when I was born. My mother seemed surprised by the question. She thought about it for a moment before explaining that I had shared features with both sides of the family. The answer should have satisfied me, yet it did not. Something about her hesitation caught my attention. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough to stay with me long after the conversation ended. The rest of the visit passed normally, but the conversation lingered in my thoughts long after she left. Over the next several days, my curiosity continued growing. The feeling was difficult to explain because it was not driven by evidence. Nothing unusual had happened. Nobody had suggested that Owen was not my child. There had been no hospital mistakes, no medical concerns, and no reason to doubt reality. Yet a strange sense of uncertainty remained. One afternoon, while organizing a closet in the spare bedroom, I discovered several old boxes that had belonged to my parents. They had given them to me years earlier when they moved to a smaller house, and I had never properly sorted through them. Most contained ordinary things: photographs, greeting cards, school records, old letters. I was preparing to close the final box when something caught my attention. A large envelope rested beneath a stack of family photographs. The envelope immediately stood out because the paper looked far older than anything else inside the box. My mother's handwriting appeared across the front. At first, I intended to place it back without opening it. Then I noticed the date. The envelope had been sealed nearly 3 decades earlier. Curiosity got the better of me. I carefully removed the documents and unfolded the first page. The moment my eyes reached the opening lines, the room seemed to grow quieter. I read the paragraph once, then again. By the third reading, I understood why my heart was beating faster. The document contained medical information. More specifically, it contained records from a fertility clinic, and both of my parents' names appeared on the file. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. For several minutes, I remained sitting on the floor with the documents spread around me. The apartment was quiet except for the soft sound of Owen's baby monitor. Yet my thoughts felt louder than anything else in the room. I read the records repeatedly, hoping I had misunderstood them. The pages contained medical terminology I did not fully recognize, but one detail appeared too many times to ignore. The documents clearly described fertility treatments that had taken place years before I was born. My parents' names appeared throughout the file. There was no mistake. Until that moment, I had never questioned my family history. My parents had always seemed open about their lives. They talked about financial struggles, career changes, family disagreements, and childhood memories without hesitation. Yet somehow, an entire chapter of their story had remained hidden. The discovery itself was not disturbing. Many families use fertility treatments, and there is nothing unusual about that. Modern medicine helps countless people become parents. What unsettled me was the secrecy. Why had nobody ever mentioned it? Why keep it hidden for so long? When Gavin arrived home that evening, he immediately noticed the papers covering the dining table. His expression changed before I said a single word. After reading the documents, he sat quietly for several moments. Neither of us seemed certain where to begin. Eventually, he suggested there might be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps my parents intended to tell me one day and simply never found the right moment. His explanation sounded logical, but it did little to ease my growing curiosity. That night, after Owen fell asleep, I searched through old photographs again. This time, however, I was not studying my son, I was studying myself. I examined childhood pictures, school portraits, family vacations, and holiday gatherings. I compared my face to my father's and then to my mother's. I searched for similarities I had never paid attention to before. The exercise quickly became frustrating. The more I searched, the less certain I felt. Looking back, I understand that I had fallen into a common trap. Once people become convinced that a hidden answer exists, they start treating every detail as evidence. Ordinary things suddenly appear meaningful. Small observations seem larger than they really are. At the time, I believed I was searching for clarity. In reality, I was becoming increasingly confused. The following morning, I called my mother and asked whether she could visit. She agreed immediately. Something in my voice must have warned her that the conversation would be serious. When she arrived later that afternoon, her eyes moved directly toward the documents spread across the table. The reaction on her face told me everything. She recognized them instantly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she slowly sat down and released a long breath. The silence felt heavier than any explanation she could have offered. I finally asked the question that had been occupying my thoughts since the previous day. I wanted to know why those records existed and why I had never heard about them. My mother listened quietly before answering. According to her, the story began shortly after she married my father. They wanted children immediately and expected the process to be simple. Instead, years passed without success. Doctors, specialists, treatments, and endless appointments became part of their lives. Each disappointment made the next one more difficult. Although she spoke calmly, I could hear the sadness beneath her words. Some experiences leave emotional marks that remain visible even decades later. She explained that fertility struggles affected much more than their plans for the future. The situation created stress, self-doubt, and uncertainty. Many couples experience similar challenges, yet few people discuss them openly. Because of that silence, many individuals suffer privately while believing they are alone. Eventually, my parents turned to a fertility clinic. That part did not surprise me. The documents had already revealed it. What came next did. My mother explained that the clinic had recommended a donor. The words settled heavily between us. For a moment, I struggled to process their meaning. Then the realization arrived. The man who had raised me, encouraged me, protected me, and celebrated every milestone in my life was not my biological father. I expected the truth to feel dramatic. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. Nothing around me changed. The apartment remained the same. Owen continued sleeping peacefully. The afternoon sunlight still filled the room. Yet something fundamental about my identity suddenly looked different. My father was still my father. No document could change that. He had been present for every important chapter of my life. At the same time, I could not ignore the fact that an important part of my history had been hidden from me. Those two truths existed together, neither canceled the other. As the conversation continued, another question slowly formed in my mind. The fertility treatment had happened decades ago. Medical technology was different then. Record keeping was different too. I wondered whether anyone knew the donor's identity. When I asked, my mother explained that the clinic had provided very little information. My parents received basic details about health and education, but they never learned a name. For a moment, I thought the mystery ended there. Then my mother hesitated. The pause immediately caught my attention. She admitted that several years earlier, my father had ordered a DNA ancestry test out of curiosity. He originally wanted to learn more about his family history, but the results revealed something unexpected. The test connected him to someone who shared the same donor, a biological half-sibling, my heartbeat quickened. If one person existed, there could be others. My mother nodded when I reached that conclusion. According to her, my father exchanged a few messages with the woman years ago. The conversation remained friendly but brief, and eventually contact faded. After hearing that story, I found myself looking toward Owen's crib. Only a few weeks earlier, I had become obsessed with questions about resemblance. Now, those questions seemed small compared to what I had learned. For the first time, I began considering a possibility that had never crossed my mind before. Perhaps the answers I was searching for would not be found in old photographs. Perhaps they were waiting somewhere inside a DNA report. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened my laptop, created an account, and ordered a test. As I completed the final step, I realized something important. I was no longer trying to understand my son. I was trying to understand myself. The DNA kit arrived 2 weeks later in a plain envelope that looked far less important than it felt. By then, I had spent countless hours thinking about everything my mother had told me. Some days I felt curious. Other days I felt frustrated. The strangest part was realizing how quickly a single discovery could change the way a person viewed their own history. I completed the test that same evening. After sealing the package, I placed it near the front door so I could mail it the next morning. The process itself took only a few minutes. The waiting period that followed felt much longer. Life continued while I waited. Owen grew a little bigger every week. Gavin remained patient through every conversation, every question, and every moment of uncertainty. Looking back, I realize how important that support was. When people face unexpected truths, they rarely need someone to solve every problem. More often, they need someone's willing to stay beside them while they work through the confusion. Almost 6 weeks later, an email arrived. My results were ready. For several minutes, I stared at the notification without opening it. Part of me wanted answers. Another part feared what those answers might reveal. Eventually, curiosity won. I logged into the website and opened the report. The first section confirmed exactly what my mother had told me. There was no biological connection between my father and me. Seeing the information in writing felt different from hearing it in conversation. Even though nothing about it surprised me, then I moved to the family match section. That was where everything changed. The report listed several distant relatives, but one name appeared at the very top. The match was extremely close, much closer than I expected. According to the report, the woman shared enough DNA to be a half-sibling. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. The possibility had always existed. Seeing it confirmed felt completely different. I opened her profile. The information was limited, but one detail immediately caught my attention. She lived less than 2 hours away, close enough that we could have crossed paths dozens of times. Without ever realizing we shared part of the same story, I read the profile again. Then a third time, out of all the places she could have lived, she was practically in the same region. The discovery made the situation feel real in a way it never had before. Until then, the donor had been an abstract idea, a medical detail hidden inside old documents. Now there was evidence of another person whose life had intersected with mine long before either of us were born. When Gavin arrived home that evening, I showed him the report. He read everything carefully before looking up. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked the question I had been avoiding. Was I going to contact her? The truth was that I did not know. Finding answers sounds simple until those answers become available. Many people spend years searching for information, only to discover that the opportunity itself creates new fears. Questions feel safe because they exist in imagination. Real people bring real consequences. For the next 3 days, I avoided making a decision. I opened the profile several times. Each visit ended the same way. I closed the laptop without doing anything. On the fourth evening, I was sitting beside Owen's crib while he slept. The room was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of a nightlight in the corner near the window. As I watched him, I realized something important. Everything had started because I became obsessed with resemblance. I had spent weeks searching for pieces of myself in another person's face. In the process, I had uncovered a story that belonged to me, a story my parents never intended to hide forever, yet never found the courage to explain. The DNA report had answered questions about my past, but it had also taught me something else. Identity is larger than genetics. The man who raised me was still my father. The family I loved was still my family. Nothing in the report could change those truths. At the same time, I knew I would regret ignoring the opportunity in front of me. I returned to my laptop. The message box remained open on the screen. For several minutes, I thought about what to write. Eventually, I settled on something simple. I introduced myself, explained how we appeared to be connected, and wished her well regardless of whether she wanted contact. Then I pressed send. The message disappeared. A strange sense of calm followed. I had no idea whether she would respond. Perhaps the message would lead nowhere. Perhaps it would introduce me to people I had spent my entire life not knowing existed. What I did know was that I was sleeping peacefully in the next room. Gavin was making coffee in the kitchen, and the questions that had consumed me for months no longer felt frightening. The DNA report had not revealed a secret about my son. It had revealed a hidden chapter of my own life, and for the first time since this journey began, I felt ready to turn the page and see what came next. Have you ever discovered something unexpected about your family history? Leave a comment below and subscribe for more powerful English stories designed for B1, B2 learners.